Today, we geek out about Downfall. Hey guys, what's going on? It's Lee from Geek City, USA here. I was fortunate enough to get a prototype copy of Downfall sent to me from Tasty Minstrel Games. Now, Downfall is a 4X post-apocalyptic game that is currently on Kickstarter right now. So it's on for a few more days. So if you're seeing this shortly after I put this video up, definitely go take a look at it. If the Kickstarter is over, definitely go take a look at the Kickstarter page or the Board Game Geek page for more information. Now I want to stress that this is a prototype copy that you're about to see, but it is a very, very nice looking prototype copy. So you see here, we have the board. I already set it up for 3 players, and I have our 3 player mats are right here. We have yellow, we have blue, and we have red. All right guys, so the first thing that we're gonna wanna do is you're gonna wanna set up the board. Now there's 3 different layouts. There's a layout for 3 players, there's a layout for 4 players, and then for 5 and 6 players. Now this right here is a layout for only 3 players, and as you can see, the game is pretty sprawling for 3 players alone. Okay, once you set up the board, you're going to pick your starting territories. You see those are the territories that are flipped over and available. Now the first person will be chosen randomly, and then after that you will randomly hand out both the second to last player and the last player card. Now what these are, if you notice too, there's a 3+, that indicates these tiles are used in games with 3 players or more. And what these are for is for the players who get the second and last pick. They would have the opportunity to change one of the territories out for whatever's on the underside of these cards. In this case, it's an oil field and a plain. So for the sake of discussion here, let's discuss what everything produces. Now, the water is going to produce food, and your food tiles are going to look like this. Now this resource is like that. It's a raw resource, and once it's gathered, it is flipped over and then it becomes edible, and that would go on water. This here is metal or iron, and this would go on this tile here. And you see once this is its raw state, and that's its gathered state. All right, here we have the oil fields, and this is where oil is produced. This is its raw state and its gathered state. And then finally you have the mountainous areas, and that's where this is produced. This is stone. You flip it over, and that's its gathered state. So the difference between gathered and raw. So if something's in, and I'll use food for this example because that's the easiest. If something is in a raw state, then it cannot be eaten. But as soon as it's gathered, it's edible. So you can use this to feed your people. So a key component of this game is going to be feeding your people. All right, now this section here, this is a wasteland, and these produce nothing. You see there's some over here as well. These produce nothing. However, the ones that have a +1 in the middle are considered to have crystal mines. So when you have any kind of combat, which we'll talk about later, that will actually produce 1 victory point if you have combat on this tile. This here is a polluted location, which it produces no resources. However, there is a full-size tile of this with 2 locations on it, and that comes with 2 gathered resources of your choice. So it's worthless as the game goes on, but if you flip one mid-game, it's not necessarily too bad because you at least get 2 of something already gathered. Now we're going to pick our starting locations, and we're just going to say, for convenience sake, we're going to say that red picks first and they pick this location, and then we'll let blue will get the second to last. They'll pick this. It's close to their player board, so it's easy for me. Now this gives them the option to replace a tile. So what we will want to do here is I would want to replace probably this tile right here, because this is going to produce nothing and this will produce food, but that's already producing food. So let's get rid of this, and we will put this in its place. We could put it any orientation that we want. For right now, doesn't really matter, so we'll just put that right there. And then right here, this will be where yellow is, simply because, again, it's close to the yellow player board. And we will say that yellow is not going to want this, even though it's worth an extra victory point. Resources are probably more important in this game than anything, so we'll flip this, and yellow is going to have quite a bit of food and oil. Okay, now we're going to place our dead zone tokens, and that's these here. And this is an area where the fallout is so bad the area has been destroyed. So typically you're going to want to place that on a location that's not going to produce for you. So for red is going to pick the wastelands area there because that's not going to produce anything. And then you have to place 4 radiation tokens around where the dead zone is. Now these start off with the number 1, and as radiation events occur they will increase, and if it ever gets to 3, that location becomes a dead zone as well, and everything there is destroyed. So we'll get to that later, but so we'll place that one there, radiation token there and there. And looking at blue's location, blue is going to place a dead zone there, and then a radiation, actually we'll do this just for discussion. Place the dead zone there, radiation in 4 spaces surrounding, and they can be unexplored areas. So we can go like that. And then lastly, yellow is going to pick for its dead zone, we'll just call the water, and then we'll put 4 surrounding, 2, 3, and 4. Now there is one thing to note is when you're placing the dead zones and the radiation tokens, on the larger player maps, there's some cases where the starting zones might be touching. They might have one shared tile, or not shared tile, but touching tile. If that's the case, you may not place a radiation token in an opponent's starting territory. So that's very important to remember. You kind of can't play screw your neighbor from the very beginning. Another item to note, if you are playing a 5-player game, you will set up as you do for a 6-player game, so there will be a zone that is unused. And for a 5-player game, you would flip the tile closest to the center of the board upside down, and then put a fallout token, or put a dead zone token on that, and then put all adjacent tiles would get a radiation token. So that kind of adds another area of complexity to start the game. Now we'll set up the player boards. Now for the first game, the instructions advise you to not play with the leader cards, just to make the game a little easier. Now we are going to play with them just so I can explain them for the sake of this. However, if you were to skip them, you would remove this deploy leader card from the technology deck. But because we're going to play with leaders, this deploy leader will automatically start out here. And then you have a leader card as well. Let me see if I can find a leader card in here. All right, and there's a leader card for each player color, and each leader has a different power. So now you look here for the red leader, it's the economist. We're going to keep this in play. If we weren't playing with leaders, we would remove this card. Because we're playing with this, we are going to need to remove a card of the same type. So if we see here, this leader matches the regrow and excavate. So what we'll do is from this deck, from the red deck, we will remove a regrow and excavate card. All right, now each of these starting territories will actually start out with 2 raw resources that they produce. So the plains get 2, the oil fields get 2, I should say food, oil. Water also gets food. And over here, we'll put a couple of oil there. Now I do want to note out too, once again, this is a prototype copy. So while the resources right now are these double-sided cardboard chits, they will be much nicer in the actual release. Now these are the bunkers. You'll start off with 1 bunker. Now if you look here, the bunker has these 3 spots. That means they can store 3 gathered resources. They have these 2 red icons, which are considered your combat power. So they produce 2 combat power if there's combat in the square that they're in, or in the section they're in. And there's 1 nuclear logo here, and that icon means that they will protect from 1 radiation. So if we look back over here at the board, if this were here, you would be okay, your characters would be able to survive. However, if this were here, but this piece here were a 2, there would only be protection from 1 element, and therefore anything else left on that square would be dead. And I'll explain that a little more clearly as we go on here. These are your airships. Airships can carry 2 survivors and 1 gathered resource. These are a bunker. Now you look here, these can store 1 resource and they offer 1 radiation protection. This is a standard survivor, so what this survivor can do is he can gather, and that's really it. He can gather and he can explore and move to new locations. At some point in the game you will be able to upgrade the survivor, and on this flip side he is an equipped survivor, and if you see he adds 1 combat strength and 1 radiation protection, but he cannot gather. So you have the benefit of he's better in combat, he can help increase the radiation protection, but he can't pick up any of the food that you might find. And then this here, this is your leader token. Now your leader, you have an action that will allow you to replace a survivor with this character, and this one provides a combat strength, it provides a radiation protection, and also allows you to gather. All right, and finally, these are your command tokens, and what these do is these allow you to increase your combat strength in a location. Now this here you have to keep track of your past cards as the gameplay progresses, and I will explain that when we get to that. All right, so to start, every player gets 1 bunker, they get 5 survivors, and then they will also get a choice of 4 other either airships or bunkers, and it can be a combination of both. So you can have 3 bunkers and an airship, 4 airships, 4 bunkers, the choice is yours. And you also start off with 3 food. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pull that together and we will place that on the board next. Okay, now we're just going to start with the blue player, and I tried to mix up these, the pieces that each will deploy. So for starters, you're going to want to place your bunker. And in this case, he's going to place it here in the grassy area. Now later on as the game progresses, you will produce more survivors from your bunker. So I'll place the bunker there on the grassy area, and then I will place the airship in the water. Now survivors and equipped survivors and bunkers and outposts cannot go into the water spaces, only airships can. Survivors can go into these spaces if there's an airship there because it's assumed that they are in the airship. And the airship also cannot move unless there's a survivor there to pilot it. I went ahead and grabbed 2 airships with these for these guys. Now I'll put an airship here. This is also, even though this is polluted water, this is still water and cannot be walked through. And I'll just place a bunker here, bunker here. Actually, I'm going to take that back. I'm going to put this bunker here. Now in each space, you can only have 1 bunker and 1 outpost. So you can have a bunker and an outpost in the same space, but you cannot have 2 bunkers or 2 outposts in the same space. You can have multiple airships and multiple survivors in a space. So we'll place a guy here, we'll put a guy here piloting that airship, put a guy here, put a guy here, and for sake of argument, and you start the game with 3 food, so you want to store your food because if it's not in storage it will spoil. So we'll just put 3 food in here. Now let me back up here. I actually don't want to do this because if you see I put a survivor in an area where there's a radiation token. Now what would happen is at the end of the turn this guy would be dead because there's no radiation protection. Whereas here there's a radiation protection, there isn't here. So what I will do for that instead is just for the sake of this, I will put a bunker here to show and illustrate how this will offer protection here, so he's okay. Now you can have as many survivors as you want, as long as the number of radiation equals the number of radiation protection or less. So if I had 2 radiation here, as long as I had 2 icons like that, I'm okay, even if I had 100 survivors. All right, now as you can see, we have the initial board layout completed. All right, now we'll set up the point tracker. This is double-sided, and so you're gonna wanna pick the side with the player count that you're doing. So whereas here I'm doing a 3-player game, so I'm gonna want this side here. And this is your environment track. So you start on 0, and you move along this track for whenever you increase or whenever you decrease the radiation. This is the actual point board. If you see, it goes negative because you can lose points fairly easily in this game. And everybody will start at 0, And then over here, you have a culture track. And everybody starts at 0 on the culture track. And as you move up the culture track, you'll see there's stars and there's +1s. If you ever get to here, you get an extra victory point. And same thing over here in the environment track, you get a victory point with each one you move. Now I did look in some of the newer available instructions, and it looks a little bit different. And here I'll show you. Now here is the environment track and the culture track in the most recent rule book that's been made available on the Kickstarter. And if you look here, this culture track is a little bit different. It shows different actions that you can do in different places versus victory points. So I'm not sure what the final output will be. My guess would be this one, but I could be wrong. And again, a lot of this is subject to change. All right, now we have this track here. Now we're gonna move along this track as the game progresses up until the very end, which once we hit here, this initiates end game. So in setting this up, we have 3 spaces for random events. So we are going to take 3 random event cards and place them on the board. And we are going to want to set this deck by the board because we may need it later. So every time a player pulls a winter card, they will increase this track here. And then that will initiate these actions or events as the game moves on. And we'll get into more detail with those as we actually encounter them through the sample gameplay. Okay, so now we're going to build our hands, and you start by drawing 6 cards out of your player deck. And you look and make sure there's no winter cards, because if there's a winter card, you will have to increase the winter track. So you see here we don't have any. And these will each coincide with one of the actions that are on your player board. So each card has either a major action or a minor action. Now let's talk about these actions. So if you look at the board here, you are going to be able to perform these major actions throughout the course of the game. So for example, if you play a gather action, that lets you flip a raw resource into a gathered resource that you can then use. So like this flips this into food you can eat, oil that you can use to clean radiation, iron or stone that up here will let you build items, okay? Now, if this option here, the regrow excavate, will place 1 food on any water or plains place that you control, and then you can put 1 matching raw resource of each at each space where you have an outpost. So for example, if blue were to play that, he would be able to put one of these here, a raw resource here, as well as 1 on any location that there's an outpost, including if there were an outpost here, he would put another food on here, another raw food. The bunker option gives you 4 different choices. Option A through D. You can choose to gain 1 survivor. You can choose to gain 1 uncollected resource, or 1 raw resource of these types, anything but food. You can gain 1 point on the culture track, or you can gain all 3. Now, why would you not want to gain all 3? Later in the game, it will become increasingly more difficult to feed your survivors. So you may want this victory point that this will give you, or potentially, or you may want these resources to do something with, but you don't want that extra mouth to feed. The build option lets you spend items that you have in storage or on a space that you occupy, and you can build items. And again, that your building list is here. So you can, one metal here will let you flip your survivor and he becomes an equipped survivor. Or if you want to flip him back to a regular survivor, you'd pay 1 again to flip him back. You can build an airship for 1 iron. You can build a bunker for 3 stone, an outpost for 1 stone. You can also, if you choose, spend 2 oil or 3 of anything else to reduce radiation by 1 and increase your environment track by 1, which often will give you a victory point. Then you have the command option. So this first you get to place a command token, and you can place it anywhere on the board. So let's say, now this is yellow over here. Let's say yellow wanted to pick on blue and say, I might come make my way this way, and that's going to give me a leg up so I can win battle. whenever you actually do fight, and we'll get into that when we actually do a fighting example, a combat example, you compare the number of command points, and the person with the most command points will win that battle. So in addition, you can also spend up to 2 movement points on separate units. So that means you can move 2 units. You can't move the same unit twice. So you can move your survivors or equip survivors to an adjacent location. Now, you couldn't move from here to here, say. The different territory types is 1 movement. It's not by hex. And then your airships can actually move 2. So if you wanted to move your airship, from here, then to land in here, you could do that. And if you so choose, you may spend an oil to place another command token or to gain an additional movement point. And then finally, we have the resource or war action. Now, the resource action allows you to gain 1 technology. Now, if you play the resource action, this technology is always available. This is cellular regeneration. You pay 1 of each gathered resource, and you can get 3 victory points. Now, your other options here as the game goes on, you could flip through here and pick a number of other items by selecting the resource option. So this here, for example, there will be an icon right here if they cost something. So you could play this, which, pillaging drones you would then place under here. And next time you take your regrow and excavate, this would come into play as well. And there's countless technologies here. And this one, for example, you would have to pay 1 iron in order to build it. And then you would put this under your build, and it would be an additional thing that you could pick if you take the build action. And then if you choose war, you can initiate all conflicts you're involved in. So anywhere that you have a command token like this would be a conflict, and you would go ahead and see who wins that. And again, we'll cover that as we get to an example as we progress here. So now back to the cards that Yellow had drawn. So you get to put 2 of these into your reserve section, which is up here on your player board. Now what that does is you can kind of then hold on to those till later in the game. So in looking at this, and again, we're not going to talk strategy, but for just sake of the action here, we'll put his religious leader card into the reserves, and then we will also put a build action, thinking, hey, maybe we'll want to make sure we could do a build action in a couple turns. We'll put that in the reserve. Okay, and then, so we'll draw blue's top 6 cards, and we'll say blue is going to put a bunker and a gather into his reserves, and then red will get to take 6 cards. And if you look here right off the top, red has drawn a winter card. There's only 1 there. So if you see here, winter card, you discard when drawn, and advance the event track marker 1 space, then draw 1 card. So we'll put this here in the discard pile. We'll draw a replacement card, and we're okay, it's not another winter card. Now, one thing to keep in mind for the winter cards, when you do the initial setup, there are a certain number of winter cards in each player deck. So if you have a 3-player game, there's going to be 4 winter cards in each deck. If you have a 4-player game, there's going to be 3 winter cards in each player's deck. And if you play a 5 or 6-player game, there's only going to be 2. And I want to mention that because we missed that the first time we played a 5-player game, and as a result, the game really flew by and we didn't get a chance to do a whole lot towards the end. The end part of the game kind of snuck up on us pretty quickly. Also, when you're doing the initial setup here, if you draw more winter cards than you have players, so let's say we all flipped a couple winter cards and we flipped, say, 4 of them in a 3-player game, you would then reshuffle all these cards, move the event back to 0, the event tracker, and then redeal again and kind of start over, so that way you can have a good spot to start from. So because red drew the winner card, we will go ahead and move the event tracker to the first space. All right, so now here's where we begin kind of the actual gameplay. So if you look here, right on your player board, it's the series of events, and you guys can take your turn simultaneously. So it's not like you have to go from one person to the next. So the game actually moves fairly quickly as you begin to understand it. So the first thing you do is you will draw 1 card. Now, the very first turn of the game, you already have 4 cards in your hand, so you don't need to draw back up to 4, so you could skip that. The second thing is you check for any pre-action events. Now that's if you have to do a conflict or a random event. You would address those immediately. Now at the beginning of the game, you shouldn't have that, so you would continue to number 3. So here's where you choose and pass what you're going to do. So for the yellow player, for example, the yellow player is going to check his hand and see, okay, there's 2 gather actions, a war research, or a command action. And you kind of want to look at your player, where you're at on the board and figure out what you want to do. One thing I should point out is each card has a major action, but there's also a minor action at the bottom. So for example, this command card, if I wanted to do a regrow and excavate, I could. Now, if you see here, it says like a major regrow and excavate, but you may only place 2 new raw resources total, your choice. So they're typically lesser powered than the major actions. However, as the game moves on, you will definitely need to do these minor actions just because you're going to need to do something and do it immediately. Also, when you have your 4 cards, if what you want isn't in your hand and you maybe saved it in your reserve, you can choose a card out of your reserve to be the card that you want to play. So what you're going to do is you're going to pick a card you want to play. Now yellow is going to want to do gather, and we'll just place that face down here. And then I will take the other 3 cards and I will put them face down, and I will take my past cards token and I will just plop that on top. And I'm going to pass that to the player on my left after we resolve everything. So I'll go over here to blue, and blue is going to, we'll just say blue's going to do command action. And again, we're not following any real strategy here. We're just for the sake of the game. And then red, we'll look at their hand. Oh, we didn't put 2 in the reserves. So red will, let's say red's going to be a warmonger, so we'll keep a war in the reserve and an excavate. And they're going to play a gather as well. Gathers are important in the beginning of the game because you want to be able to feed your people. Okay, now you would simultaneously flip over the card you put face down in your discard pile, and you would perform that action. And you can do that independently of whatever anybody else is doing. If, however, you have an action that happens in a square with somebody else or in a hex or location with somebody else, and timing of when they're executed matters, you'll look down to the lower left-hand corner. There's going to be numbers on these cards, and the lowest number would take priority. So let's say yellow and blue, we're going to go at it for whatever reason, and it mattered. You would look at the 2 different cards, and yellow's card has a 17, blue has a 46, so yellow would get to perform their action first. Okay, so yellow had played the gather action, and again, what gather lets you do is for each one of your regular survivors in a single space, you can choose and flip 1 raw resource into its gathered form. So what I would do is I'll look at yellow and I'll say, okay, I have a survivor here. I'm going to flip this resource into usable food. Now, usually you would want to store it if you could, because when it comes time to feed, the very first thing that happens is all resources that aren't in a storage area are spoiled and destroyed. But one thing you are able to do is every card has a cyber storage location right over here. And you may store 1 item in your cyber storage. And there's also a research card where you can upgrade your technology to get 2 additional spots that slide into the side there. Let's say we had multiples here, multiple different types of resources. You can move them in and out of the storage on a location, but you can never move, like I couldn't move this food over to here or over to here. The only way you could ever move a food is if you store it in an airship and the airship moves somewhere else. Okay, so I have a survivor in this area here, so we will flip this guy. I have a survivor here, and he will flip this one. I have a guy here, he will flip one of those. And then this guy in here, he's going to flip this, and we'll leave it in that bunker for now. We can put this one, or not bunker, but outpost. We'll put that in that outpost. And that was yellow's turn, so we can discard that card. Come over here, and red also picked a gather action. So what we're gonna do for red is the same thing. Wherever there's a survivor, there's a survivor here. So we'll flip a food. There's a survivor here, so we'll flip a stone. There's no survivor here. There's 2 survivors here. So we'll flip both of these in this square. And then there's a survivor here, so we can flip that one there. All right, and lastly we have blue. So we'll flip blue, and blue picked command. So again, what command lets us do is command lets us place 1 command token. So blue will say, doesn't really matter necessarily this early in the game, but let's think that maybe blue's gonna go this way. So we'll put it over there just in case blue chooses to attack later on. And then blue will also get to spend up to 2 movement points on separate units. So what we will do, now, like look at this guy, I wouldn't want to move him in here because he would die because of this radiation. So where else can I move somebody? Well, I'm going to take this guy here, and I'm going to move him into this square, which you would usually not be allowed to move in, but there's an airship here. So I could place him in the airship. And that's 1 movement. And then my other movement, I'm going to use this guy to explore a little bit. So we're going to move the airship from here, let's say to this square here, or this hex here. And what happens is you flip it, and you can put it in any orientation you want. Now this, unfortunately, we have the polluted waters. So we'll place that just there, doesn't really matter. But these 2 areas here, we get to pick any resource of our choosing and place it in there in its gathered form. All right, so I picked oil and food. And this airship is technically here. Now, we could choose to stay here. We could choose to stay here, or we could take a second movement point. So we're going to take a second movement point. And while we're in this space, we are going to take this food and store it in the airship because the airship can store 1 item. And we are also going to take this, and I'm just going to put this over here into our cyber storage so that way we have it. And I'm going to continue to move. And I'm going to move towards this command token so we can initiate some combat in a couple of turns. So we'll flip this. Again! Another one of those. So he'll continue to move into here, and we'll put 2 resources. So we'll just pick whatever. There's an oil, and here's the stone. And that's it. That's the end of the first round. Now, usually you would check to see if there's any post-action events, but because we did not have any fallout or spoilage, because we haven't moved up the event track yet, we don't have to worry about that. So what we do is you take your cards and you would pass them to the person to your left. So we'll just send this way, and blues will go, to red, and then red's cards will go to yellow. And then you start the next round. All right, so let's see what yellow was passed. So red passed yellow these 3 cards, and yellow gets to draw up to the 4th card. Oh, and draws a winner card. So we immediately discard that winner card and draw, another winner card. So yellow just drew 2 winner cards. Again, we got to replace that 1 card. Okay, so he's up to 4 cards. But because he drew 2 winter cards, we're going to move the event track up 2. All right, now here's the 3 cards that blue was passed from yellow. And blue will go ahead and take a top card. Jeez, blue draws a winner card. Let's replace it. Okay, so there's his 4th card. Okay, and because blue pulled that winner card, we're going to increase that up to 4. And here's red's 3 cards. We will draw up, you've got to be kidding me, another winner card. I'll draw a replacement. Okay, so now red has 4 cards. And once again, we will increase this track. So now let's start with red. So looking at red's spot. All right, so what is red gonna wanna do? So we're gonna play a build card. Now we don't have any resources to really build anything physical, but if you look here, part of the build action lets us reduce the radiation. And if you look over here, red has gathered a couple of oil resources. So we'll take this build card, and we'll put it face down in our discard pile. And we'll take the other 3 cards, flip them over, and put our pass card token on it. Now we'll move over to yellow. Now yellow, if you recall, had blue making some moves over into its territory. So yellow is going to want to play a command card to kind of stick it to blue and to protect its own place. And we'll place that face down and pass cards. And then finally blue. Blue is going to keep on keeping on, play another command card, hoping to defeat some yellow over there. And we will take these cards, flip them over, put the pass cards, and now we move on to the reveal. All right, again, you do this simultaneous unless there's something that matters. So everybody would flip their cards over and see. So we have build, command, and another command. Now, based on the cards that we drew, timing does not matter, so we can all perform our action simultaneously. So red's gonna play their build card, and if you look here, now they don't have any resources to really build anything physical, so they're not gonna build a bunker or an outpost or anything. But if you recall here, as a part of the build action, you could spend 2 oil to remove 1 adjacent radiation and move up 1 on the environment track. So we have this we can use because we have control of this location, and we have this we can use. And then we get to remove 1 radiation. So I am going to remove the one here by our food. And that comes off the board. And now this guy would be fine if there wasn't an outpost, because there's no longer any radiation in this square. And then because red was able to clear up some radiation, they're going to move up 1 on the environment track, which then allows them to move up 1 on the victory point track. Go over to blue. Now blue has another command card. So blue is going to take their command token, and they are again going to place it right over here in the yellow location. And they also get to spend up to 2 movement points on separate units. So what blue has decided to do here is blue is going to go ahead and move this airship into this zone with yellow. Now here's where the areas get a little overcrowded. Now again, I think a lot of that has to do with it being prototype, because this would be a ship that's a 3D model, and I think things would stack a little bit better. We just kind of dealt with it as the game went on, and you can start stacking the resources as time goes on. I don't think it was as big of an issue as some people kind of made it sound, but it does get a little annoying at times, as you can see here. But anyway, we only moved 1 space out of the 2 that the airship can move, and we're fine. We're just going to stay there. And then for my other action, we're going to move this airship. I'm going to move it 1 spot into the water, and then 1 spot into this hex here, because I want this guy, I want to move him out of this area. Now see, even though there's 2 people in here and only 1 radiation protection, we're fine because it's protecting the 1 radiation that's there. All right, now we have yellow. Yellow also played a command card. So we could take our command token, and yellow is going to try to bolster their location here. And hang on, let me clean this area up a little bit. Okay, it made it a little bit better. So you see now, yellow has a command token and a survivor and an outpost, and blue has a survivor, an airship, and 2 command tokens. So we've resolved our actions. There are no post-action events because we have not crossed a fallout or spoilage feed event on the event tracker. So we will take our cards and pass them to the player next to us, and that ends this round. All right, now on to our next round. We look here, we draw a card. So here's the 3 cards that yellow was passed. Yellow will go ahead and draw a card from the deck. Oh, we have a winter card. Yellow will draw a replace, and we have another winter card. And another, okay. So we have 4 cards, and we get to move the winter track up. By winter track, I mean event track. So we will move up 2 for the 2 winter cards that yellow has drawn. All right, and here are the 3 cards that blue has that were passed from yellow. And blue will draw its fourth card. All right, we're good. And then red's 3 cards. And red will draw a fourth. And we have another winner card. All right, so there's the 4 cards for red. And thanks to red, we will officially cross in to our first event on the event track. Now, if you see here, this says complete action first. And that coincides with our player board that says draw a card, pre-action events. The spoilage is actually a post-action event. So we know at the end of this turn, we are going to have to feed our people. So let's talk about that. In order to feed our people, we need to be able to give 1 gathered food per survivor. So if you look here, yellow, for example, has 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 survivors. Now yellow also has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 gathered food. Actually more because there's some in the cyber storage. If you take a look here at this event, for the very first one, the spoilage is going to be to destroy all unstored gathered resources. So if you take a look back at yellow's location here, this here is going to be destroyed because it's not in storage. This is safe. And there's no other resources not in storage. Now if you look over here too, see these up here that weren't picked up? These are going to get destroyed because they're not in storage. So something to keep in mind. But, so you're going to destroy resources, but you also get 3 free food during this first feeding action. Now, as the game goes on, you see the second one, you actually only get 2 free food. The third one, you only get 1 free food. And then the very, very last, you get 0. And then if you look again at the bottom here, for every unfed survivor, you lose 2 victory points. Or you can lose only 1 victory point if you kill your survivor. So if we take a look at the game board, we can see that yellow over here should be okay for food because they have more than enough food gathered and they're getting 3 free. So yellow isn't going to worry about doing anything that'll gather food for their action here. If we look at blue, blue has 3 food in storage in their bunker. They're going to be set because they have that 3 plus the 3 they're going to get from the event. And if we look at red here, red has plenty of food as well. So all in all, we don't have to worry about this upcoming feed event, so nobody has to scramble to make food. So what yellow is going to do is yellow will just play regrow and excavate. Flip those over. And again, I'm not really thinking through on strategy. Juggling what 3 players are doing on a board at once and keeping it all in mind is fairly difficult at this game, as well as there's so much strategy and so many things to take into consideration. Can't really do it on the fly in this way, so this is definitely me just picking something for the sake of showing actions. We'll have blue at this point. We're going to do a research just so that way we can explain what research looks like. Flip those over, the pass on it. Then we have red. We'll do a gather with red. Flip that over there. Put the card. All right, so everybody's going to reveal. Order's not going to matter this time. So what yellow did was a regrow and excavate. So what that does is let you place 1 food at each water and plane, and then excavate will let you put 1 matching raw resource on each space with an outpost that you control. So if you go over to yellow's area here, we will say that they would get a raw food here, a raw food here. They have no water, so we're okay. Even though this is liquid, this is not water for the sake of being able to grow any resources. And then we look wherever there's an outpost, and we're going to put a raw resource there. So you look, this will go here. And again, even though we placed one already, there is an outpost hidden here. So there will be another one there, another food. Put one there. All right, now for blue, blue is going to do a research. And what that means is we get to go through our deck here. Now I could immediately, because I played a research card, I could discard 1 of each resource that's been gathered and gain 3 victory points. Unfortunately, I do not have that. and nor would I necessarily want to do that. What I'm going to pick, for the sake of this, doesn't really matter. We'll put, here, this is free. So we'll put pillaging drones in. So what pillaging drones lets you do, so like yellow just did the excavate, regrow and excavate, that would also let me, that says every gather action, one of your survivors may gather from an adjacent space instead of their own. The resources moved onto your survivor's space. So what that means is last turn, yellow here, they could have taken one of these resources because it's adjacent to where they're at. So they could have actually taken this off of here and placed it, well, there's no storage available, but it could have at least been into this tile. And then red is going to do a gather. So we'll look at red's situation here, and we could just place this into the bunker. And here's a gather that gets flipped. This oil will get flipped. This here would get flipped. Survivor here, this could get flipped and placed in that outpost. And then there's a guy here. So we can flip this, and I'm just going to put this into the airship. Now that takes care of all of our actions, but now we have to feed our people here because of the vent tracker. And so first thing, anything that's not in storage gets spoiled or destroyed. So we would look here, we could start with red. This isn't in storage, so this is gone. This is gone. This is gone. Everything else is okay because this is considered in storage and these are in outposts or bunkers. So that's it for red. We'll look at yellow. This isn't in storage, so this is gone. This isn't gathered, so this is okay. We don't lose this. This is gone. And it looks about good for yellow. Now we have to feed our people. So as of right now, since it's still close to the beginning of the game, everybody has 5 survivors, so they need to pay 5 food. Now we're given 3 free food to do this feed action, so we really only need to take 2 food. So blue here will take these 2 foods out of this bunker. Red will take this food, oops, and this food. And yellow will take this food and this food. And that's it. We've completed our first spoilage and feed phase. And then we would just pass our cards over. Pass the cards to the left, pass the cards to the left. And then we would draw and continue. Now let's say that we had drawn enough winter cards where now it's the fallout time. So now fallout, if you look, it says, again, complete action first. So this happens after we complete our actions. So everybody would do their action, they would have their card face down, they would flip it and perform whatever action that they had. And then we would go ahead through to the post-action events, as you can see there, and we would do the fallout action. So the fallout action, you're going to look everywhere that there's a dead zone. So for red here, you see this dead zone. Every adjacent location will either gain a radiation or increase its radiation. So if you look here, this is adjacent, so this becomes a 2. This becomes a 2. This becomes a 2. And this will get a radiation token. Now, this is important because you look here, this is turned to 2. There's a guy here, but this bunker will, or this outpost will only offer 1 radiation protection. So because this is 2, there's not enough. This survivor dies. And because we lost a survivor, red is going to lose 1 victory point because one of their guys died. Okay, now let's look at yellow. This is going to turn to 2. This will turn to 2. This is going to turn to 2. This will turn to 2. And this kind of kills us for our conflict later on, but if you look here, this is at 2. There's only 1 radiation protection. So in this square here, this guy dies, this guy dies. So both blue and yellow lost somebody. And now blue and yellow are both going to lose 1 point on the victory track. And then finally we'll look at blue here, and there's blue's dead zone. So this will turn to 2. This is adjacent, so this turns to 2. This one here is going to turn to 2. And this one will turn to 2. Now blues had a really bad turn overall because they lost the guy over in the yellow area. But if you look here, even though there's a ship, there's only one radiation protection here. So both of these guys here have died. So you can see how quickly something could happen where you could completely kind of get screwed, because now blue not only lost 3 guys, but he also lost 3 victory points. So blue lost 1 victory point earlier and is going to lose 2 more for these next 2 guys that died. All right, so we're going to rewind here, and I put the yellow guy and the blue guy back here, and we're going to say, hey, we made it to the conflict here. And the first thing you do with the conflict is you look to see if there's peace. Now, if at any point there's no conflict, meaning you have 2 colors with a command point, at least 1 command point, so like if we only had a blue command point here, that would be considered a conflict, blue on yellow, so there would be no peace. But if everything was clear, there were no conflicts elsewhere on the board, each player would get 1 victory point for every 2 spaces that they occupy. So a space would be 1 space, 2 space that you occupy. So where you have a person or an outpost or a bunker, not an airship. And then you can also choose to pay 1 additional food to round up. So if you occupy 5 different locations, you could pay a food and get 3 victory points total. But we don't have that, so we actually have a conflict to resolve here. So you see conflict, winner gets 2 victory points, loser gets 1 victory point. So conflict is as easy as this, is who has the most command points. Here, blue does. So these are going to come off the board because there's a conflict. So you can't use those again. They're out of, they go back to the player stash. They can redeploy them later. And blue wins. So right away, blue is going to get 2 victory points. And yellow, who lost, will get 1. Now, the winning player in a conflict they could choose to destroy or convert to his own any 1 outpost, bunker, or airship that the losing player owns on that space. So right here, blue won. So this outpost here, I can choose to destroy it, but blue would rather take it over and do that. So now, blue actually owns that. Another option is I could have killed one of the loser survivors on that space, causing them to lose a victory point, but in this case, I'd rather have the bunker. And finally, if the losing player has any survivors left in the space, the winning player gets to choose an adjacent location for them to retreat to. Now, you can't retreat into an area that they would die, so I couldn't say retreat him into, over here. Again, we were pretending that these people survived, so we'll pretend this one. So we couldn't retreat him here. If this were land and that would kill him, we can't retreat him there. And we also cannot put him into a place owned by a third party. So I'm just going to go ahead and retreat him into this square here. So now let's say we draw enough winners to move to the random event. So let's see how that would work. So what you do is you would immediately, before any actions, would resolve this card. So let's flip this one. And this says random event, draw 2 additional random event cards and complete each now. So we'd go here and let's draw 2. Right, the first says, for the rest of the game, each time a player removes radiation, they gain 1 additional victory point. So this we would keep up here, and we need to remember that for the rest of the game. So whereas before, when you would clear radiation, let's say red cleared radiation and moved up that and we got 1 victory point over here, they would actually get 1 additional victory point. And then the other random event card here is each player places 2 regular survivors at any space or spaces they occupy. Now, this here is a pretty interesting one. We drew this in our 5-player game, and it really screwed us all because we all had 7 to 9 survivors that we couldn't feed later on. So we were all happily up in this area on the point tracker, and by the end of the game, I think the majority of us were 10 points or less. So that can be a pretty good or bad card, depending. So that's it. That's the very basic gameplay. Now let's discuss endgame scoring. All right, so at the end of the game, we are going to kind of walk through what the endgame scoring. So first thing you're going to do is each remaining survivor that you have on your board is going to be worth 2 points. So let's say hypothetically, let's say blue had 3 survivors, so he would get 6 points, so bring him up to 27. Red has 2 survivors, so that would bring us up to 19. And yellow had 1 survivor, so that would bring us up to 11. Then we would look at any random event card that added additional scoring, which we don't have any. Some of these, there's one like plus, here's one. All mountain spaces are worth 2 victory points at the end of the game. So if you occupy a mountain space, you would get an additional 2 victory points per. And then you look at the environment track, which is this one here, and the player who has the highest on the environment track gets 6 victory points. So in this case, it would be red. So red would go over here and get 6 victory points. So we would go from 19 to 25. Whoever is in second place would gain 4 or 3 victory points in a 3-player game. So that would be yellow. So yellow would gain 3 points. 1, 2, 3. And then the player with the third most will get 2. And that would be obviously blue. So blue would get 2. And you do the same thing over here for the culture. Whoever has the most culture gets 6 points. So that would be red. Red would get 6. Bringing them up over here to 31. And then in second place on the culture track is yellow, so yellow would get 3 points. 1, 2, 3. And then blue, being in third place, would get 1 victory point. Actually, in a 3-player game, last place gets no victory points. So then you take a look at the track, and whoever has the most points is the winner. And that, in a very, very condensed nutshell, is how to play Downfall. Now again, I want to remind everybody that these are prototype components, and also we did a very, very quick run through. I wanted to give everybody an idea of kind of how a turn played out. So there was no strategy taken when I was going through all this, so keep that in mind. And we'll take you back up top here, and I'll let you know my thoughts on the game. All right, so what did we think of Downfall? So in short, Downfall was awesome. It absolutely exceeded everything that I thought it was going to be. I love Post Apocalyptic. The idea of 4X games is fantastic. However, there's a lot of that extra complexity that goes into a 4X game that makes them take 4 days and just a lot of brain power. This game, once you get down the basics as far as what the major actions are, the game really starts to cruise. And the idea of the winner cards that move along the event track that then makes, the need to feed your people, or there's the Fallout event, or is there combat, it really forces you to really take actions you weren't necessarily planning on taking. For example, if you're coming close to a combat event and you know that you're 1 or 2 winner cards away and you've got people encroaching on your territory, you don't want to lose that area. So you might then choose to play a command card so that way you can counteract the other player. Well, that could totally screw your plans that you had to get food elsewhere to feed your people in the next step as it comes down the road, when you have your spoilage and your feeding. So it's like a lot of worker placement games that I've played in the past. It reminded me a lot, as silly as this sounds, of Agricola. In Agricola, you're always struggling to get stuff done and to take actions. And that's what these cards are in a lot of ways. These are the actions that you're trying to take to build your little society and feed your people. And you never seem to have quite enough time to do exactly what you want to do, and you never have quite enough food to feed all of your people. So, and that is an awesome thing. So there's constant tension, there's constant stress, and it is such a good tension and such a good stress that when we finished playing, I wanted to play again. And I've played this a few times now. I played a couple of 3-player test games. I played a 5-player game that we got some of the rules wrong. We put too many winner cards in, and again, I mentioned that earlier, but it really made it cruise through the end game, which worked out because we were pressed for time, so we kind of had to finish. So but that was good for us to know for the next game. And then I've done a couple of 3-player run-throughs since. So all in all, I love this game. Now let's talk the weight of the game. So yes, this is a 4X game. Yes, there are pieces and cards, and there's little chits that'll be, you know, miniatures and pieces of plastic or wood. There's a lot going on, but this is a game that once you learn the basics, you will absolutely cruise through without a problem. I was very, very pleased with how that ended up. I did not expect it to play as smoothly as it did. Conflict, so the conflict in the game was a little bit easy. You know, whoever has the most wins, and yeah, that worked. It was fantastic for what it was. There could have been a little bit more attention paid to conflict, but in fairness, there's so many other things going on. I don't think you really need to do much more than who has more and they get it. So I think that was fine overall. I absolutely love the way the feeding events went, because every turn you start to get, or every time you have one, you get fewer and fewer free food, where by the end of the game you get nothing. And I love that you have a choice where you can lose 2 victory points and keep your guy, or you can kill poor Bobby over there and you only lose 1 point. So it's that risk reward of, am I even going to be able to feed my people? And I'm losing victory points, but does that matter? You know, so you have so much to juggle. And then the way that the Fallout events played out, I was very surprised, because we were playing and it was no big deal and we kind of had the Fallout contained, but then you have a couple of Fallout events and next thing you know, you have more dead zones, that, because these things, this accelerates quickly. So, and then once you get 2 dead zones, so like right here, I don't know if you can see, but if you get 2 dead zones side by side, both of them are giving additional radiation to their adjacent squares. So before you know it, 3/4 of the board or half the board is you know, completely dead. We had the 5-player game that we played, a buddy of mine, he had all the farm and he was set for food, no big deal. And by halfway through the game, his whole area had been radiated, and all the planes were dead, all the water was dead, and there was no more food to be had on the board. So we were all struggling to get to squares to get food to feed our people. And frankly, the end of the game, again, it accelerated because we had too many winter cards, but at the end of the game, we all pretty much lost the majority of our survivors. So let's talk about the clutter on the board. Now, I know that there has been a little bit of, I don't want to say heat about that, but some people have, you know, voiced some concern there. And yes, I will say the clutter on the board gets very difficult at times, especially on these tiles that have, you know, 3 different areas on them. So if you have a lot of stuff on each of these areas, it's all bleeding over, and heaven forbid you do conflict on that. But, you know, again, this is all prototype, so I like to think that, you know, the resources would be wood, or, you know, at least, you know, cardboard chits, and then the survivors would be wood squares or what have you. And then the ships will be plastic, maybe the bunkers will be plastic. Who knows how the stretch goals will end up at the end, but I would think that as it's deluxified, that would be mitigated. There will still be clutter, but it helps to kind of add to the, you know, holy crap, there's a lot going on at one time. Now, there is an additional add-on that you can get in the Kickstarter where you can get larger hexes to play with, so you can actually enlarge your map. Same number of squares per play, but the hexes are actually bigger. And I would definitely recommend that I think I would recommend that because, again, bigger hexes, more room, more visually appealing, I would think. I mean, the art looks great as it is. But the only concern that I would have to that is, you see, this is a sprawling game. This is a pretty big table that we're sitting at right now, and this was only set up for a 3-player game. Now, if it was set up to 5 or 6 players, the board itself would fill this whole area up. So, you know, that's kind of, what would you rather? Would you rather have a little extra space for your player boards and your pieces, or would you rather have a little nicer aesthetics to look at? But all in all, I loved the way the game flowed. I loved the passing of the cards, because you could look at cards and you could consider what your neighbor was trying to do. And if you knew, hey, this guy needs to gather some food to feed his people, and right now, unless he has something stored in his reserves, I have control over whether he gets food or not. So you know what? I am going to use the gather action, or if you don't want to do that, I'm going to place something out of my reserve and put that one gather action that I have in my hand and back in my reserve to, fill that spot. He's not getting any food this turn. And, you could do that, so that's a pretty cool feature. There's a lot of strategy that can go into that. There's a lot of strategy across the board. Do you want to be aggressive and just, flat out start attacking and prevent other people from getting food? Do you want to steal their stuff? Do you want to just explore and see what kind of, stuff you can get? You might have to, I found myself in one of our games having to get out of the area, my starting area, because it was so radioactive and desolate that I literally had to get as many of my people as I could out of there, and a large number of them died as the radiation spread. But I had to move on and be like a little traveling band of nomads to try to find some new area to get food, to get supplies, get anything. So I was I thought that was cool. So let's talk about these random event cards. Now, there are a lot of random events in the deck that come with the game. I was a little bit disappointed that there was only 3 on the board. Now, granted, as you see in the playthrough, one of them said, hey, draw 2 more cards and take those actions immediately. And there's a few of those in the deck. But still, there are a lot of event cards that you don't see. Now, replayability, it's great, but I almost would have liked to have seen maybe 2 or 3 more random events triggered. Of course, again, there's so much going on and you're already a step behind getting food, getting resources. You're always fighting to catch up. There may be too much of a good thing if you do more than 3. But that was one piece that I would kind of say, I'd like to see more random events, at least in a handful of playthroughs. Now, I may play 10 more games and say, you know what, forget it. I don't want to see any more of those because there's, we're stressed out enough as it is. So there's that. So again, thematically, the game is fantastic. The art lends well to the theme. The player boards are very nice. Now, again, this is all prototype, but I love the fact that the player boards show you the actions in depth. You're not looking at a little card, but you have your actions here, and then you have your builds in the turn. So everything, all the rules you really need are on this card. And I would think that, based upon playing this and reading these rules, I think that as heavy as this game seems, I think you could play it with people that are, I don't want to say casual gamers because I think it would scare them off, but I think people that may not think they're ready for this style game, I think this would be an excellent step into 4X games and into the heavier games like that. In fact, one of the people that I played with on our 5-player playthrough is not as much of a gamer as a lot of us, and he was able to catch on, and he did fantastic, especially considering he doesn't game a whole lot with regards to board games. And so that's a testament, number one, to the flow of the game, and number two, to the way the game is explained on these boards. Now, there were some discrepancies in the rules that came with this prototype that kind of went in conflict with the rules that were available on the Kickstarter page. So there were a few areas that we had to call audibles on, or that I found myself calling audibles on, with regards to, do you have to control the area or just occupy it? And then the winter cards. So for example, the prototype instructions, the instructions that came with the prototype, didn't specify to limit the number of winter cards to have in a player deck. However, the instructions that were on the Kickstarter page did. So, there was that. And again, it's a prototype, so we're going to run into those issues. But all in all, this was a beautiful prototype. This game was fantastic to play. I had a blast playing it, and I sincerely cannot wait to play it again. I had so much fun with this game. I was pleasantly surprised that it was not overwhelmingly heavy. I was anticipating Twilight Imperium, and to say after 6 hours, you know what, I think I'm good, I get how the game plays. You know, this was a game that you were able to play pretty much from start to finish and say, hey, that wasn't too bad. We could play again, or not, but you know, I definitely did not feel burned out playing the game. Let me jump back to the winter cards too. I thought the winter cards were very cool because it took an element, it reminded me of Pandemic, because it was like pulling an Epidemic card and you go, oh, things are gonna get worse, and then, you know, okay, now we gotta feed people, now we got Fallout, now we have an event. I thought that was a great touch. I thought that was a great way to progress the game, and again, to not know how the flow of the game was gonna be. You could go through an entire, you know, 10 turns and not see any major events on the event track. You could also go through 2 turns and see 3 of them. So great feature here, a great mechanic. I definitely enjoyed that. So to break it down in a nutshell, I love the theme. The theme was perfect. The art looks great. The gameplay was fantastic. I would highly, highly recommend this game. This is a game that would absolutely go into my collection and stay in my collection. This prototype, if this is anything remotely close to what the final game is going to look and play like, this is going to be a game that there's going to be a lot of people talking about. TMG has always gone above and beyond their Deluxified games, so I can only imagine how beautiful this game is going to look once it's all blinged out. So I would definitely recommend it. I can't say enough positive things about the game. Clutter notwithstanding, I think that is hardly a speed bump at all in, you know, the playability of this game. That to me does not detract